Hey, this is Davin with Hagerty and our Redline rebuild updates. Today I'm working on the Buick head. It's been a little bit of time as far as getting back to this project, but we're back on it. And mainly we were working on our new shop, as you've seen. It took a little while. But we're back on the Buick head. It is all ready to be assembled. Last update, we went through and we painted everything. The head is completely machined. It has a flat surface on the deck. Of course, it had some warp based on the fact that this cylinder head is about 35 inches long. And over time, of course, it gained a little bit of a arc in it. That has been taken out. It was only 10 to 20 thousandths. It wasn't a ton, not like an eighth of an inch or anything. Now, one thing that we found is that the casting for the cylinder, the chambers, they are not dead consistent like the Hagerty can come in and hit, at to thousandths of accuracy. The casting is not that way. In fact, most castings are pretty good if you get them plus or minus 20 thousandths as far as where a surface is at. The machining operation is, 20 times better than that. So what we found is when we machined out the old seat to put in a fresh seat, the height of that seat would change up and down quite a bit based on the casting moving around it. It's not that our Hagerty wasn't consistent in the depth as far as like from where the valve springs hit to where the bottom side is exactly the same. That depth is the same relative to the Hagerty function, but relative to the casting, we were leaving the seats up a little high. So there's times where we had to actually sink the seat in just a little bit further so it was flush. And you don't want that seat to hang into the chamber because now you create yourself a hot spot and then you get detonation or spark knock. So that is some of the things that you deal with a casting. Now, after that, and how that makes sense here for today, is I need to go through, as I with every assembly, I go through, and ultimately this spring needs to be set in here at a certain height. So relative to the cam, your spring needs to have X amount of pressure at X seat height. So what you end up doing is you take a valve, and I'll use the exhaust valve here to start with. The installed seat height for this particular spring that I have at 1.9 inches, it gives me 90 pounds of seat pressure. Why that's important is that seat pressure is what closes the valve, and then you also have an opening pressure. So as the valve pushes down, that spring rate gets you a higher load on the spring, and so it returns and comes back when the camshaft load goes down. So again, to measure that, I use a micrometer that's especially for this. You put your retainer in and your keepers. And what you're doing is using the micrometer to mimic the spring, but it gives you a way to measure. I'll turn this so you can see it, what that height is. So with the micrometer in here, it shows that I measure out to 1 inch 965. So this pocket is 65 thousandths bigger than what it needs to be. And at that point, all I'm going to do when I go to do my final assembly is I'll put 60 thousandths worth of washer in here, and that'll get my spring pocket within that specification. Now, I'm sure the first question is, how do I know that I need to install these at 1 inch 900? And that's where this spring tester comes in, or at least the verification of the spring. And all the spring tester does is it has a load cell on here, and it has a micrometer for your height. As you raise and lower this, obviously your micrometer changes, and let's zero, that's pretty close. All right, so there's 0. So now all I do is I take my spring, set it in on the pad, and as I bring this down, you'll see my load will start increasing as I put pressure on that spring. Again, this is zeroed, so I'm going to bring it to 1" 900. So there's 1" 900, and I need 85 to 90, and I'm pretty stinking close. It's 82. What I can do is I can adjust this pocket by 5 thou or whatever, and I'll get right on the 90, but as far as I'm concerned, that's close enough. So that's how you go through and you verify that your springs are going to be correct for the seat pressure that you want, and then of course the opening pressure. Now, I went through and done all these springs, so I already know that they're good to what I'm looking for. With that spring tested and all the rest of them already done, I am ready for my assembly. I'm going to go through here and walk through all this. Now, like all the time, end of the day time lapses, well, Ben's been hard at work, and he's already done a lot of the stop motion relative to this assembly process. So it'll turn out pretty well, and I think you'll enjoy it. But for me, I got to get to work getting this head assembled. So I went through every one of the spring pockets, and I've understood what my amount of shim is going to be relative to each valve at each spot. Now that variation, like we talked about, is relative to the seat height. This is all one solid surface, but the seats have some variation. Now the other thing is you're also taking into account the variation in the stack up of all the other parts. So not only your keeper has, you know, a little bit of different angle, and then, or I should say, your retainer has a little bit different angle to it, and then the keeper has its own angle, and that placement here, you know, changes ever so slightly. This takes all that out of that when you measure it as a stack. Now, as we go through, I have quite a bit of variation relative to intake to exhaust. Now, the reason for that is we are using an intake valve from a 400 Buick instead of the straight 8 Buicks. And you can see here at the tip, and this will change our placement, the valve itself is the same length. So the tops of these will all be the same relative to the rocker arms. But the keeper placement is going to be slightly different, and you can see it here pronounced in the distance from here down to here, and likewise on the intake. That amount of difference is about 100 thousandths. And it's not going to change anything other than the pocket depth will be larger for the spring on the intake. Therefore, I need a little more shim underneath the spring for the intakes and take up that gap. Now, the reason I'm using the 400 valves is they're much more readily available than the intake valves were for the straight 8. And they're ever so slightly a little bit larger in diameter, so we'll increase a little flow into the chamber. So during my assembly, I like to make sure I have plenty of just regular engine oil on the shafts of the push rods, on the shafts of the valves, and obviously I already have some lube and the guides from checking the springs. Now when I went through and measured each one of these pockets, I wrote with a Sharpie right on the retainer. So on this exhaust valve, it needs to be 65 thousandths. So now it's just a matter of coming up with a shim pack that gets me to 65 thousandths, or at least within 5 or 10. So that's that one. So these two will make that. Yeah, it needs to be. You're right. That inner spring is probably going to just work its way on. You can't see it, so at this point, to know if it's there or not. Probably here in the middle of it. There's the first one on. The first one's always the trickiest because you're getting all your tools and stuff kind of set up in your process. But that's one down, and we got 15 more to go. Well, here we are. Things are not going as planned. Ran into a snag. Well, 2 snags. Well, 3 snags. You ever feel like, when you were a kid and you did all your homework and you're all proud of it and you turned it in and the teacher reminded you that there was a back page? Well, that's kind of how I'm feeling right now, because I thought I had all my homework done. I got my valves, I have my springs, I have my seals. Everything is supposed to work perfectly. Well, it's not. So, first minor issue are the springs. These are stock springs. This is a stock guide, and it's awful tight how this guide comes on. So quite honestly, if I put the spring in there this way, it physically will not go over that. So the OD of the guide at the bottom is larger than the ID of the spring. Now, if I flip it over, I can make it work, meaning it'll press on, so on and so forth. I'm not sure if that's bad or not. From an engineering mind, it says, well, it's not the best thing, but as this spring compresses, the ID of the spring will open, so I'm probably not going to have a problem with it. I can most likely live with that. However, if I can figure out a way to cut that OD down a little bit and not have such an interference fit, that would be best. So that's the first dilemma. And probably the easiest one to convince myself that it's okay. The other dilemma is these 400 exhaust valves that I'm using on the intake so I can have a larger diameter intake. They have this little step down, at least this particular brand that I have. They have this step down at the top, which typically is probably no problem, other than these guides hang way up out of the head. And if you look closely here, you have your seal put on, and you have this step here. Well, I have a camshaft that has a huge lift of 400 thousandths, and I have only 150 thousandths showing. So the problem is going to be is at not even halfway open, it's going to go over that sharp edge and it's going to eat the daylights out of the seal, if not just completely yank it off. Obviously, that is not going to work long term. And then, of course, the second part, you can see that my typical function of using a socket to tap my seal into place is actually eating the top edge up, and it just doesn't look good. So I need to come up with a better way of doing that. That issue though is this diameter of the steel sleeve and the rubber are ridiculously small. So there's no real ledge to grab a hold of. So I am slightly back to the drawing board. I'm looking at some other brands to see if they do not have this ledge in here. If this is my only option relative to valves, then what I'm going to have to do is compromise my guide length. So the length of this guide into the head, which is supporting function of the valve. I may have to take a valve cutter. I had sitting here. The seal cutter here. Obviously I need the guide, but take the seal cutter, and what that'll do is I can bring this down, and I can cut the top of this off and the seal and bring it down another. Really, if I get another 300 thousandths, I'd be good, but I'd probably go to 400 thousandths. And then that would provide me ample space for the seal and for the edge of the existing valve. But until I get a call back from Parts House, I guess I really won't know. But that's kind of where I lay here with this head. Oh, shizzle sticks. But on a positive note, when we took the engine over to the paint shop to get painted, if you remember, the truck broke down. Well, I fixed it. Tell you what, I'll take an easy fix any day of the week. Point gap closed up. Who'da thunk? Hey, I'm gonna go enjoy the ride today. You get out in the shop, get your work done. You can do the same thing. We'll see ya.